I recognise that there has been a surge of discontent this year, so I am really glad to be here today to talk about that and about any aspects of inspection and accountability that you want to talk to me about.
Moving on to one aspect of the report that I think has had more publicity than any other, and that is the single word judgment, which I believe in your submission it was described as an easy way for parents to understand the quality of their child's school. But in session after session, and from all sorts of different witnesses then, we have been variously told that it is a blunt instrument, that it lacks the detail and nuance to fully capture the work of a school, that it's the main driver of stress for leadership teams and for head teachers, and that in fact it doesn't raise standards. What are your thoughts around this single word judgment?
First of all, if you look at any of our reports, they absolutely do give a rounded picture of a school. We talk about the quality of education, the behaviour, personal development and leadership. And in all our graded inspections, we report separately and grade each of those. So there's no question that the world pays too much attention to the overall effectiveness judgment relative to the pieces underneath. But I do constantly have to remind people that there is already a scorecard built into the inspection framework and the set of judgments that we use.
When you then try and distill that down into a single phrase judgment and try to pretend that that can then sum up everything that you're trying to say, I think that's deeply problematic and deeply unhelpful and actually undermines the usefulness of that report for schools and colleges. We also know that parents do value the clarity, as we said. We are just one part of the whole regulatory system, and the reason the overall judgment has such freight and weight in the system is because it is the thing on which those interventions are hung. And in my discussions with stakeholders about whether it's really about the words themselves or it's about the weight that hangs on them, when you get to the point when you say, well, okay, so what alternative words? They acknowledge that it's not about the words, it's about the consequences. And what they really want is to take out the consequences. And of course, that heads off into a completely different conversation, which is not mine to have.
We're very attracted by the idea of something that is much more binary. And I think the current legislation offers an opportunity for that. Section 44 sets out what a school's causing concern is. There are two categories. One where a school is not doing as well as it might in all reasonable circumstances be expected to do, something like that, the words say. And another one where the school is failing to provide an acceptable standard of education and the leaders and managers and governors aren't capable of improving it. That's special measures. The first one is serious weaknesses or significant improvement. I think it would be fine, really, to look at schools and say, do you fall into that category? That's a tiny number of schools. So if we could develop something that was more nuanced and more thoughtful, we could have a report that picked up what schools are doing well, where they're making strides forward, what they're trying to develop, and then points for improvement, and you could show collaboration there. Now, that's a more complex way of reporting, and we'd need to think about how you did that. And maybe you could do that through a report card or some other mechanism. And again, we're thinking about what that means, because Daniel's quite right. No point in introducing a report card if we then put a load of high-stakes measures on it and it does exactly the same thing.
I did suggest an alternative formulation of inadequate to the head teacher unions, and it was very clear in that conversation that as soon as I proposed an alternative, they recognised that the consequence thing was the real point at issue.
Would you be surprised if in one of our sessions the feedback from inspectors serving and past, in my experience of the panel, they were unanimous in their now rejection of this single word judgment and said, well, of course, time was now for change.
But it's not a change I can make, because I would be deliberately thwarting a regulatory system that hangs off it, and then the regulatory system would be hung on something else, and that would become the new extreme pressure.
I think the sort of name and shame culture that we have in this country around inspection, and it's not just applied to schools, it's applied to care homes, it's applied to prisons, it's applied to all sorts of things where we have single phrase judgments, and it's all very name and shame and high stakes, and yeah, it's great for the media, but I'm not sure it's great for improvement. I think it's something that we should want to move away from, and we should have a system that has a duty of care towards the people who work in that system. But that doesn't mean that it's not challenging. It doesn't mean that it's going soft on standards, but it's saying, who should we be accountable to? In the case of schools, I think we should be much more accountable to parents and to the community that school is in, and furnish them with the information to understand how the school is doing, and to then work with the school around how it might be able to improve. I think we should hold the governance to account much more, and indeed the chief execs of the MATs to account much more. Why is it that Ofsted judgments are career-ending for head teachers, and yet the people who are paid the really big bucks seem to sort of get away with it? I think that's a problem that we need to address.
Some of the people you've talked to probably inspected in an era sort of before the modern regulatory system and academisation orders existed, and are basically wanting to recreate that world. But as I said, that's not for me to create.
Is it credible? Is there not a deficit where a school can be deemed requires improvement, and just a matter of weeks or months later can be good?
Absolutely not.
World.
It's a fine line. Schools are on a continuum. A school that's judged requires improvement, maybe sort of just one side, and another 3 months on, it can absolutely.
So the single word doesn't really do justice then to the good work that's happening in the school, if in such a short period of time, by addressing one particular area or one particular sort of department or one particular aspect of leadership, it can dramatically change, because there is a chasm, is there not, between requires improvement and good. That's
the intervention threshold, and one of the reasons for maintaining a system of multiple grades, not just a pass-fail, is that if we had a 2-grade system, there would be even more weight and pressure on that boundary. And again, we sit with CQC, Prisons Inspectorate, Police Inspectorate. The model of accountability could evolve, but I don't think it's for Ofsted to unhook itself and say, we're going to change public policy here. I would be inserting myself as a policy maker, and people are generally quick to criticise chief inspectors who turn themselves into policy makers.
The single biggest change and the single biggest impact that Ofsted could have on the well-being and workload of school leaders, college leaders and staff and teachers, and therefore trickles down to students, and therefore recruitment and retention, which is probably the biggest problem our members are facing, is to remove single phrase judgments.
So there's no evidence that the single word judgments raise standards. That's really what the Ofsted's aims should be. The fact of the matter is the current mechanism isn't really working for parents. We were looking at some parent kind data recently. 36 of parents find Ofsted reports difficult to understand. So it seems that the current system isn't working for the profession, it's not working for children. It's also not working for parents who have absolutely a right to know as much detail about their school as they're sending their children to as possible.
Ian?
I think we understand the attractions of a single word judgment because it seems simple, doesn't it, and easy to understand, but actually it's really deeply flawed. Schools are highly complex institutions. They have a range of strengths, they have a range of weaknesses or areas for development, and so we just don't think you can reduce that to a single descriptor of good or inadequate. We think it's misleading, actually, to parents to do so. And we need to remember that inspection just offers a snapshot of what the inspectors see on that day. And in the past, certainly, it's been very backward-looking because it's looked at the previous performance of previous students.